Alright guys, we're still in the Middle Ages. We're going over feudalism today. It's a really important part of understanding how society was, how do people live, what was the political organization at the time. Because we talked about the barbarians were able to invade and take over, that was the way that society was after the fall of the Roman Empire. And so it's very localized, and so the government is decentralized, not allowing for really a development of a country or a kingdom to be widespread. So we're going to focus in on what's happening at the local level. As you can see here, it's a pyramid of the hierarchy, and we're going to get into detail of what it all looks like between each of the ranks. Okay, so before we actually get into feudalism itself, I do need to mention that there is a second wave of invaders, and they're mainly coming from Scandinavia, but not just there. So you have the Vikings. These are Norsemen. This is what we call the Viking Age, and the first wave is going to come in 793, and they are sailors, and they are able to do expeditions on their Viking ships, and they're exploring, and they're trading. And of course, we know that they are strong warriors, and so they look to expand from their lands because from farming they realize that they are, growing out of land, and they want to expand their borders. So they begin to sail on their long ships, and they're able to go to many parts throughout Europe and raid the mainland. Okay, that's the background. The one thing to know is that with the Vikings, but also the other types of invaders, the way that they're going to be incorporated into the rest of Europe is through being converted to Christianity. Okay, so some other groups that are from the east, okay, are going to be the Magyars. In Latin, they are called Hungarians, and they're going to settle kind of in the middle. I'll pull up a map for you guys. Okay, so the Magyars are coming from the east, heading towards Central Europe. Okay, they too do not have any strong central governments in Europe at this time. It's because everything's very localized, and that's why they're easily able to take over. So for the next 2 to 3 centuries, from 800 AD to about 1100, we're seeing that barbarians, also known as Vikings, and you have also the Muslims that are coming from the south. They're coming from the south. They are even reaching Spain, okay, and they even are going to Italy and all these different places and spreading their kingdom. Okay, let's talk about the hierarchy of society. Really it's divided into 3 main groups. Okay, you have those who fought, those who prayed, and those who worked. Right, those who fought are going to be the warrior aristocracy. Those who prayed are the monks, right? Those in the monasteries, the clergy, and those who worked are going to be the serfs, the peasants, and the slaves. Okay, they actually have very distinct roles, and we can say that society during the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, this is not the early, but the High Middle Ages, it's going to be harmonious in the sense that they all have their own certain roles. The thing is that it wasn't that peaceful and rainbows and happy, because it was a difficult time to live. Okay, all right. So let's talk about feudalism and why it came. Well, for one thing, we did talk about because of the invasions, the second wave, right? They needed to have a system of how to protect themselves, and so with the absence of an organized state, we can see that the local government is what they can actually control. They can't control a whole country, they can't control a whole empire, but they can control a local government, which is in their own estate, their own manor. Okay, the disorder that came from the different barbarians. Okay, you have the Vikings with the second wave. This is known as the darkest time of the Dark Ages, and so the disorder required them to figure out a way to protect themselves. That even if they don't have a country and they don't have an army, right? They can at least hire or recruit certain knights who are known as vassals to actually fight for the lords. Okay, this is going to be connected to manorialism. This is an economic system, and I'll go into more detail, but feudalism and manorialism are actually different in the sense that manorialism is economic, feudalism is more political, but they work hand in hand. Okay, Feudalism comes from the Latin word feudum, which means fee, and how are we going to pay each other is kind of the relationship of how feudalism works. A few things is that Charles Martel, I mentioned him, and how in the Carolingian dynasty he is known as the one who supported his warriors, his knights, with horses, and he was fighting Persia and in the Byzantine area. So the main thing is that Charles Martel would also give them land for serving him, and he is going to be known as the father of European feudalism. He is the one of the first examples of showing that by realizing that cavalry, knights riding on horses is a great tactic militarily to fight. He's actually going to promote this by recruiting more people, by offering them gifts in this sense. Okay, the soldiers that are fighting for these lords and even fighting for Charles Martel, it's called a vassal. It comes from a Gaelic word that means servant. Okay, all right. So eventually the Carolingian Empire is going to break up, and a lot of the powerful nobles decided for themselves, even without the kingdom of the Carolingians, right, they are going to recruit their own vassals, and that's the system they're going to carry out even after the Carolingian dynasty. Okay, so one thing about medieval hierarchy is that it was a natural thing. Okay, it's just assumed that this was the way of life. And as you can see on the right-hand side with this triangle that's split into different pieces, you have the king at the top, right? Then you have the lords, vassal, knights, and peasants. And that's kind of how God designed the world. That's what that they thought, it was. And no one was above God, but there's other people that was above you. So everyone had a superior and inferior, right? So everyone was kind of above you or below you, but the king and the pope were kind of at the top. We also have the way of life. So where you're born is where you're going to live, is where you die. There really isn't a jumping between the hierarchy levels, right? You just kind of are assuming that's where you live. Okay. Feudalism is a reciprocal relationship. It's really a contract because it's a system where rulers are exchanging land for loyalty. It's a contract in saying that we have a relationship, right? If I give you a gift, right, of land, then you have to serve me for 40 days a year and you have to fight for me. Okay, so you have a lord, and he is going to provide food and shelter and protection, as you can see on the right hand side. He is giving the knights or the vassals land, as we call a fief, right? And so in return, the knight has to pay homage, right, which is a promise, an oath, and they're gonna, the lord puts his hands over the knight's hands and says, what. Yes, I take you as my vassal, and you will be, I will be your lord, and you must serve me, and that's kind of the relationship that they have. Okay. Also, we talked about how manorialism was kind of the economic system. What happens with the peasants and the serfs is that the serfs are not slaves. The slaves are not bought and sold. The serfs are bound to the land. Okay? So the serfs must stay there. They pay rent. They also farm the land. They give parts of their crops, and in return, right, the vassals of the lord of that area is able to make a living off of that. So there is an economic trade system. And one thing to know is that this is all taking place on an estate. Okay, and so a lord can be have all this land and section it off to different vassals, as you can see in the lower left hand corner, and the vassal will then distribute it out to the peasants like that too. Okay. So legally, the lord is the one that's kind of like the judge. If there's any disputes on his land, he's the one who's deciding. The vassals can be his counsel in that sense. And the peasants are also getting protection from the vassals. Okay, the peasants are also getting protection from the lord in that sense too. Now, one thing to know is that if you're a lord, you can actually be a vassal to the king. You can be a vassal to the duke or a count. So that's something to take in mind of how this whole thing works as a hierarchy. And this is actually going to change after the Middle Ages. But during the Middle Ages, this is going to last for many centuries.